Okay, our last speaker, Anush Tamarsuni. She's a PhD candidate, Department of Anthropology at the University of California, UCLA. In her dissertation, she's trying to analyze the questions of memory, materiality, and the ruins of the context in the context of Van. She's trying to incorporate Armenian, Turkish, Kurdish histories and narratives together in that dissertation. I think we're going to have an excellent paper. Please, Anush, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, and I'd like to thank the Foundation and especially Karun and Delal Dink for organizing this. Like David and Burçin, I'm focusing on Van specifically in my dissertation, and so it's an unbelievable gift to us emerging scholars to be amongst all of these experts who work on Van. Today I'm going to give a brief snapshot about my dissertation research. Before the Armenian Genocide of 1915, the province of Van in the Eastern Ottoman Empire was one of the most important centers of Armenian religious and cultural life, as we've seen from the earlier panels. In my paper, I explore the remnants of the Armenian community of Van 100 years after its destruction. I detail the afterlives of the churches and monasteries that have been ruined but have survived to the present day, and explore the meanings of the built and destroyed manifestations of these remains on the landscape. I also explore how contemporary residents of Van interact with, remember, and narrate the Armenian past of the city, and how the legacy of the Armenian community remains a present factor in the local historical and political consciousness. I highlight how this continued relevance of the Armenians' past presence and present absence has been shaped by the prevalent material remains of the departed community and the efforts of the local governments to change the discourse about politics, peoples, and places. Finally, following Walter Benjamin, I suggest that the ruins of the Armenian community may serve as a site of resistance against the nihilist historiography. To many people who live in contemporary Van, the history of the Van Armenians has become invisible and mute, a distant past that is manifest only on postcards displaying the 10th century Church of Akhtamar. For others, the Armenian past represents future possibilities as they hope to discover the fabled riches that they believe were left behind as the Armenians fled. Still for others, the Armenian past represents both a shameful history requiring recognition and atonement, as well as a site through which to confront and deconstruct the nationalist, denialist, and exclusionary official narrative of the state. Thus, in Van, the history of the Armenian community represents palimpsests of violence, in which the century-old tragedy of the genocide becomes overlaid by more recent stories of suffering. In this way, the Armenian past is at times silenced and muted, and at other times visible and acknowledged, both through the narratives and memories of the locals, as well as through the physically destructive act of treasure hunting. In Van, the material legacy of the Armenian community and the palimpsests of violence are visible on the landscape. 100 years ago, Van was a province with nearly 300 churches and monasteries and over 400 Armenian villages. Today, in almost every village, one can find the ruins and remains of Armenian churches, monasteries, homes, and cemeteries. In this paper, I will outline 2 examples of historic Armenian villages, which are both now Kurdish villages, that each represent possible afterlives of ruins and exemplify the ways in which locals imagined their village history, as well as how the state and local governments approached the Armenian past. Khorkom is a village in the Edremit district of Van province. It was an Armenian village before the genocide and was also the birthplace of the world-famous Armenian-American painter Arshil Gorky. In the Republican era, along with the majority of place names in Van province and the region, the name of the village was changed to a Turkish name and became officially known as Dilkaya. Just as the original Armenian name was erased from the map, slowly over the years, the Armenian churches, monasteries, homes, and cemeteries were also dismantled and repurposed by the Kurds who later settled there. My first visit to Khorkom in 2011 was a visit in which my local guide took me there to see Arshil Gorky's birthplace, as well as to see the local church. But when we arrived, we discovered that in the place of the church, there had been a house that was built in its place. We were confused about this, and we asked a man who came from a neighboring garden, and he explained to us that the owner of the property on which the church was standing decided to tear it down to build a house for him and his family, even though the local imam had warned him to respect the church as a holy site. After he had torn down the church and built his house, disaster fell upon him and his family. His wife and his son died. His second son became paralyzed, and he himself became ill and was left bedridden. The neighbor who told us this story pointed out an Armenian khachkar, or carved cross stone, that was visible in the foundation of the house, and concluded this tragic tale by explaining that the whole village knew that such bad fortune had befallen the man because he had destroyed the church. In this tragic tale of destruction of both the church and the man's family, the violent history of the Armenian community is congealed in the space of the church. The church is no longer a mute and inactive ruin, but a node around which lives are lived and destroyed, and the past is imagined and narrated. Indeed, the church acquires agency and becomes a destructive actor in its own right. This year I visited Khorkom again to see the Edremit municipal government's newly built memorial fountain commemorating the birthplace of Arshil Gorky. This was a remarkable monument considering the policy of denial, destruction, and the rewriting of history that has been dominant in Turkey since the founding of the Republic. Over the past few decades, local initiatives have had a considerable impact on the perceptions of the Armenian past in the southeast, despite and indeed working against the official state narrative regarding Armenian history. The Edremit municipality is one example of a local government that has been trying to come to terms with its local history and to acknowledge the Armenian past in a spirit of democratic inclusiveness. With small yet striking gestures, such as writing some of their municipal signs in Armenian, Turkish, Kurdish, and English, the municipal government is attempting to both acknowledge the Armenian history of the area and to change local historical consciousness. Last year, in the village of Khorkom, the municipal government decided to officially commemorate the local Armenian history in an attempt to reverse the ongoing process of erasure and destruction. I spoke with some of the municipal officials who planned and carried out the project, and they explained to me that on a visit to the village the previous year, they were surprised when locals took them to drink water from a natural spring which they called Gorky Spring, or Gorky Cheshmesi. After they inquired further about this, they learned the story of Arshil Gorky and that he was born in the village. With this new information, they decided to build this fountain on the site of the spring and install a sign next to it that provided a short biography of Arshil Gorky in Armenian, Turkish, Kurdish, and English. And I believe actually some friends from Agos helped them with the translation into Armenian. I went to the fountain to visit the fountain with two local Kurdish friends who live in Van, Zeynep and Azad. And when we arrived, we read the inscription on the fountain, which was its name translated into 4 languages. In English, it said Gorky Fountain. In Turkish, it said Gorky Cheshmesi. In Armenian, it said Gorkut Shadırvan, and both the Turkish and the Armenian mean the fountain of Gorky. In Kurdish, however, it read Kani Gorky. And this was confusing to us because it was grammatically incorrect. Our friend Zeynep was irritated and began to complain about the incompetence of the municipality. She said, "How absurd! Here they are, Kurds, trying to make a statement about how democratic and inclusive they are, and they're by building a fountain for an Armenian, and they can't even write properly in Kurdish. At least learn to write in your mother tongue. The problem with Kani Gorki, the problem with the Kurdish inscription, Kani Gorki, means fountain Gorki. It should have been Kaniya Gorki, which would mean the fountain of Gorki. While Zeynep was grumbling about this seemingly careless error, our second companion, Azad, pointed out a deeper irony. Kani Gorki, he said to himself. Maybe they wrote that on purpose. Maybe they're trying to get people to think about the Armenians' absence. Indeed, we then realized the unintentional double entendre, because Kani in Kurdish is both the word for the noun fountain as well as the question word where. So, the grammatically correct translation for the inscription Kani Gorki can be read as, where is Gorki? There you go. This accidental error turned the fountain into more than just a monument commemorating the birthplace of one individual Armenian painter. It became a site of interrogation, a space to ask the question, where is Gorki? Where are the Armenians? What happened to them? Why are they absent, and where did they go? The inadvertent admission of those two letters opens the space to interrogate the official history of erasure and to reimagine local history in new and more inclusive ways. Thus, both intentionally and unintentionally, the monument serves to acknowledge the Armenian past and to question the Armenians' present absence in the village. The example of Khorkom, a village in which the local Armenian history is acknowledged and commemorated by the local government, is a rare one. In the case of most Armenian villages, the local history remains mute and often invisible, apart from a few crumbling ruins. In other cases, the Armenian past becomes silenced by the official history, which emphasizes the Muslim and Turkish past as it erases the Christian and Armenian aspects. This is the case in the village of Kopanes, where not only the history, but also the very geography and landscape of the village are de-Christianized as they are Islamicized. Kopanes is a village that lies just east of Van on the western slopes of Mount Varak, or Erekdağ today. Like Khorkom, Kopanes was rechristened with a Turkish name and is now called Sarmaç. Kopanes was also an Armenian village before the genocide and was the site of the 13th century monastery of Surp Grigor. This monastery, like most in the region, has been plundered for stones and dismantled by treasure hunters and is now, unfortunately, in ruins. Beyond its Armenian history, which is of, unfortunately, little interest to most locals other than zealous treasure hunters, Kopanes has another special significance that makes it a local tourist attraction, especially in the summer. The village is a religious pilgrimage destination for local Muslims because it was the site where the Kurdish Sunni Muslim theologian Said Nursi lived for some time in the early 1920s in a small abandoned chapel on the hill above the monastery. A few years ago, in order to commemorate Said Nursi's time in the village, the governorship built a small mosque at the base of the hill and paved a path decorated with quotes from Said Nursi leading up to the top of the hill where the chapel is. The blatant irony of the situation is that while all of this effort is made in order to commemorate Said Nursi, the actual site where he stayed and taught, the small chapel at the top of the hill, is in ruins. On one of my first visits to the village with my friend Azad, we encountered a gregarious local man named Shefik, who was eager to share his knowledge of the village with us. We were standing on the platform that you can see there next to the mosque, and we were looking out over the ruined church, the village, and the stream running down the valley towards the city of Van. Shefik had just been doing some yard work while we were talking, and he had a large, rusty saw that he was waving around as he was pointing left and right, which was kind of intimidating, but it also made it more exciting. Thank you. So we asked him about the church, and he told us that unfortunately it had been destroyed by treasure hunters and locals who had been looking for stones to build with. We were then joined by another villager named Bekir, and the two of them recounted to me how in the 1980s the villagers tore down one of the two churches and used the stones to build part of the mosque for the village. One of the walls of the mosque, however, collapsed, and they concluded to themselves that it might not be appropriate to build a mosque out of stones from a church, so they decided to reuse those stones and build a school. Indeed, on my next visit, I went and visited the school, and you could see on this one-room schoolhouse the visible crosses that were still in the stones on the outside of the walls. Our new friend Shefik was an enthusiastic rock hunter, and he explained that his grandfather used to talk about the times when Armenians and Muslims lived as neighbors. He said, "They were very hardworking," my grandfather used to say. "They weren't like us. Wherever they went, they built things, and they left their names behind, so we remember them." He then pointed to this large rocky outcrop across the small valley and said, "You see that rock? They call that rock Kevre Mujo, or Mujo's rock in Kurdish. Mujo was an Armenian man, and it is named after him. Many years have passed, but we see that rock and we still remember him. You see, in the old days, people left their names behind, but not anymore." Hearing this, Bekir, the other villager, interrupted Shefik's narrative to add his own interpretation, saying, "Wait, there's more to the story than that. In the old days, there was an Armenian man named Mujo in this village, and they took him and his whole family up to that rock and threw them off the rock into the valley and killed them. That's why they call the rock Kevre Mujo." Shefik, the first villager, seemed to not hear Bekir's comment and continued with his narrative, saying, "The Armenians left their names behind, like the names of our villages. They are all left from the Armenians. For instance, this village is called Kopanis, and there are a lot of other villages like that, Shushanis, Ermanis, etc. And do you know where those names come from? A long time ago, there was an Armenian woman named Nis who was very wealthy, and she owned 100 villages. She had villages all the way from here to Khoshap, and all of the villages were named after her. That's why they're called Kopanis, Shushanis, Chorevanis, etc. In fact, the original Armenian names of many of the villages in the area end in the Armenian plural ending ants, which contemporary Kurdish locals pronounce as anis. Because of this, Goghpans becomes Kopanis, and the neighboring village of Zirvandans becomes Zirvandanis, and the village after that, Sorovans, becomes Chorevanis. Mythical as it may be, however, the story of the woman named Nis is just one of the many ways that the Armenian past lives on in the present in Van and makes up part of the living local history. Unlike Khorkom, where the Armenian past of the village is to some extent officially recognized and even celebrated, in Kopanis it is left to the mercy of treasure hunters and is crumbling into invisibility. In Kopanis, the Islamic significance of the village is emphasized and memorialized, and this process becomes visible on the physical landscape. As the chapel and the monastery are slowly destroyed by neglect, time, and villagers looking for treasure or construction materials, new mosques are built and signs displaying the sayings of a Muslim cleric are installed. Thus, the geography that once was the site of an Armenian Christian spiritual sanctuary is transformed into a Muslim pilgrimage site, and the earlier history is slowly erased from view. Nonetheless, despite official state efforts to change the historical narrative and to Turkify and Islamify the landscape, the Armenian past lives on in the memories and imaginations of the Kurdish locals as it makes up part of the historical story that they tell about themselves. In my paper, I have argued that the material remains of the Armenian community in Van is an ambiguous site haunted by palimpsests of violence. At once both remembered and forgotten, acknowledged and denied, the Armenian past cannot be erased and has become contested territory. The Armenian past is a site of struggle between local and official narratives that is played out through its very materiality. Following Walter Benjamin, I suggest that the ruins of the Armenian community represent a site of resistance against denial, forgetting, and erasure. the Armenian material remains are a constant reminder of the absent Armenians and provide a tangible critique and counterstory to the Turkified and nationalist history of the state. In this way, the ruins of the Armenian Savan, though undergoing daily destruction, provide a source of hope of resistance against the denial and silencing of history and the possibilities of new stories to be told. Thank you.